places that we'll be looking at in Europe are mainly in France and England. The French cathedrals are around Paris. Chartres, Basilica of Saint Denis are both, Chartres is about 60 miles southwest of Paris. Saint Denis is a suburb. The Basilica of Saint Denis, and I'm limited right now, I don't have a laser pointer. Emily is checking around for one, but I'm not sure that we're going to have it. But Saint Denis was the first of the Gothic cathedrals, or the Gothic buildings. It dates from about 1150, when the whole idea about bringing more light into these buildings and going higher and wider really took its, had its earliest beginnings. Rouen Cathedral, third one on the list, is in a city about an hour north of Paris. Rouen, it's the capital of Normandy. You may know of it, you may know of Rouen and Normandy from World War II history. It was occupied, and shortly after the D-Day landings, the US troops liberated Rouen and kept moving. And the Rouen Cathedral is a little bit north of Paris, and then the other three, Canterbury, Salisbury, and Wells, are in England. Those in the US that we'll be looking at: the National Cathedral in DC, the Cathedral of the Epiphany in Sioux City, Jesu Church, one from, we have one slide from church in Milwaukee, and then the others in Iowa. Most of them in Iowa City, except for St. Francis Xavier and Dyers. We'll look at a couple things there. Okay, before we get into the pictures of the cathedrals and the churches, a little bit of background. Here's some things about sacred symbolism and the basics that I'd like to share with you and kind of give us a framework for the talk. Folks who lived in the Middle Ages thought a little bit differently about the world than we do. And I'm going to be quoting a couple things from two art historians who I think sum it up best. Emil Mao, who wrote The Gothic Image, there was a different mindset. These folks had a conviction that both history and nature must be regarded as vast symbols, so that the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament as Christians call it, became a symbol for Christian theologians in the Middle Ages. The stories of the Hebrew Bible, the creation story, Noah and the flood, stories about King David and so forth, became prefigured in many ways, according to the medieval theologians, things of their own time or in Christ's time. So we'll be talking a little bit about the symbolic quality of history informing the worldview of the folks in the Middle Ages. And the second quote there, I think even puts it a little more succinctly, and that is that the physical world as we understand it has no reality except as a symbol. These folks might take a look, and in fact, talking about that church in Paris, Saint Denis, the first of the Gothic buildings. The priest who conceived that building, a man named Abbot Suger, believed that God is really in light, that as he and the builders let more light into these buildings, that people would be, in some sense, transformed and affected by the light coming in, that it would be a spiritual experience for them. So light symbolized God. And then a third point there, that medieval art is didactic. It's meant to teach. A lot of the windows and the sculptures are depicting the lives of saints, meant to teach by example, life of Christ, life of going back much further. There's a Noah window that we'll be taking a look at from Chartres Cathedral, story of Jonah. All of these things relate and meant to teach. The medieval minds, we talk about the medieval mindset. Who are the people who really influence this stuff? I'm just going to point out a couple of them for our purposes here. St. Thomas Aquinas is probably the best known of them. He wrote the Summa Theologica, big encyclopedia of knowledge up to that time, vast in its scope. But the ones that are favorites of mine, at least for this purpose, is Jacob of Voragine. Jacob of Voragine, anybody heard of this guy? You have, okay. He was a writer of the lives of saints. Wrote in the Middle Ages and wrote a book called The Golden Legend. So this book really is a compendium of all of the stories of saints, old and current at the time, but many of the artists drew on that book as their inspiration for some of the stained glass and sculpture that they made. The other one that I'll point out is Vincent of Beauvais. Vincent wrote a series of books called The Mirrors. The Mirror of History, The Mirror of Instruction, The Mirror of Nature, and his writings became, for the sculptors in particular, the inspiration for things like with the mirror of nature. Some of the exteriors of the cathedrals in Europe have wonderful and fanciful sculptures of different animals that have symbolic meaning. We'll take a look at a couple of them in the talk today, or in the slides today, including one from the National Cathedral in DC, where they've kept that tradition going. So anywho, that's kind of the framework for this. Questions to this point? Any questions about sort of the background here? Okay, keep going. I'm going to define iconography, and then we'll get into the meat of this. It means writing with images. Malcolm Miller, a tour guide at Chartres Cathedral, says it's like a lost language, and I believe him. The first time I heard him talk about it, it was like, holy camole. I had no idea, you know, and growing up in Milwaukee, surrounded by all those churches, I realized I've taken this all for granted. I've looked right past it. It's been around me the whole time, and I never really even thought to think that it's connected to something bigger. The whole thing, though, about this iconography, this medieval way of looking at the world, is really, it took a nosedive in the 1500s with the Protestant Reformation. And the reaction to the Protestant Reformation in the Catholic Church was really to kind of turn its back on the Middle Ages and that whole way of looking at the world. They were beginning to think we have to be more rational about this. We have to look at the world, you know, not in terms of what everything symbolizes, but we have to look in terms of what it means in cause and effect. We have to be thinking here about a rational approach to the world, to science, to faith, what have you. There was a lot of tension at that time, kind of moving away from this medieval way of looking at things in symbolic terms. Okay, a few principles, and this is the structure that I have for these slides. Emil Mahl wrote that in the Middle Ages, art was at once a script, a calculus, kind of a mathematics, and a symbolic code. The result was a deep and perfect harmony. We're going to be looking at these slides in light of a sacred writing, the extent to which that these artists use forms to write things, a script that they use to convey meaning in pictures, images, symbols. And by the way, it was very much an authorized kind of script. That is, everybody knew it, everybody practiced it, so that everybody who looked at this stuff kind of understood, okay, that's what they mean. Second point here, that it was a sacred mathematics. There were rules for placing, saints for instance. Peter, for instance, had pride of place next to Christ, that sort of thing. There was a very, very structured order. Peter or John, I must say. And then there are meanings for numbers, and we're going to take a look at that in some detail here. The meaning of numbers like 4, 8, 12, and so forth. And then the third point there is symbolic code. That the artist would use figures like fruit, a piece of fruit, to symbolize merit. They would use flowers to symbolize different people. A sword for St. Paul, and so forth. So these things are called attributes or emblems, but they convey meaning. They help identify who people are without having to read their names written out in Latin or Greek script or whatever it might be. Okay. I'm going to start here with a postcard of an aerial view of the city of Rouen, north of Paris. This is the one in Normandy. And I just want to point out a couple things here. In the Middle Ages, there was this huge building boom that started around 1050 and continued to the Great Plague that came around 1350. So it was this 300-year period when a lot of buildings were being built, not just in France, but in England, in Germany, in the Netherlands, throughout Europe, in Italy, and so forth. This was a small city at the time. Today it's maybe a couple 100,000 people. But just take a look in this central city at what you have for what was then probably a city of 10,000 people. A huge cathedral built around 1200. Up here, a huge abbey church. Monks lived there and worshiped there. That was built about 50 or 60 years later. Over here, a beautiful building built late in the Gothic period called Saint-Klug. I don't know anything about that particular saint, but a beautiful building, much smaller than the cathedral, but built within that same period, within about 100 years of one another. And if you look really close, and we're not going to do it here, in between are dotted all sorts of little parish churches that were built in this same period of time. One writer said that during that 300-year span, in France alone, 80 large cathedrals were built. There were hundreds of other big abbey-type churches built. And his estimate is that there were dozens of thousands, I've never quite seen that term before, but you're thinking, 12,000, 24,000, I don't know how many we're talking about here. Parish churches built during that time frame. So when we in the United States in the 1800s, and around in Europe, people in Europe too, renewed their interest in Gothic art and architecture and started to build some of the churches around us, like St. Francis Xavier in Dyersville, like the United Church of Christ on Clinton and Jefferson Streets. They were built in a revival style, reviving some of the architectural principles of these Gothic buildings. And they had a lot to look at. They had a lot of things, a lot of sources to draw upon. And we'll take a look now at what some of those things were. So I'm going to start first with sacred writing and look at these three places. Go ahead.
What is abbey? Is that a religious precinct or something?
An abbey is a place where an abbot holds forth. An abbot is the head of a monastic order. So, for instance, you might find like the Benedictine monks would have an abbot heading up their order. In each of these little cells, there was usually a big mother house for these monastic orders, and then smaller places like this that were satellites or offshoots of that big mother house. So there were a bunch of different orders: the Benedictines, the Augustinians, for those of you who are from a Lutheran tradition. Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk before he became a reformer, Protestant. So anyhow, that's the connection there. Yep.
The size of these things, where did the money come from?
Where did the money come from for these places? Obviously, it took a lot to construct buildings of this size. It took a lot of time, a lot of people. Money came from, it varied a lot from place to place. In some of the cities, the money came from the local rulers who might be wealthy. At the time, places like Rouen Amiens were fairly wealthy. Another city east of there, Rouen, was very wealthy because of the champagne trade. So the rulers there contributed a lot to this. But there are some interesting exceptions. Chartres Cathedral, a little bit south of Paris, rulers contributed to it, but also a lot of people did. And in the stained glass windows at Chartres, you'll even see some of the different tradesmen, or trade groups, not tradesmen, but trades represented in stained glass. So you'll see that, for instance, shoemakers contributed, and they're memorialized in stained glass. The people who put shoes on horses, the farriers, have a little wonderful little scene of them, with a horse in a, not a stall really, but it's more like a cage. They kind of got him into the cage, and this is where they kind of put their feet up and have a little bracing for them to put the horseshoes on. So these folks contributed as well. But it really varied a lot from place to place, and obviously it took a lot of money to construct
It's
these.
almost like Peter's pence that the Pope has now.
Was it like the Peter's pence that the Pope has now? Not so much. Most of that money, to the extent they would have collected Peter's pence at that time, and it really was later that it became a very unpopular thing, that money was collected later to reconstruct St. Peter's in Rome. So this was mostly before that, and also a lot of local contributions. There's a real pride of, there was a civic pride that I think had to motivate some of this, because you'd see people in one town, Chartres, which was known, made most of its money on wheat. It was in the middle of a very fertile wheat area, so it was a big farming community with very wealthy landowners because of that. That is likely what contributed to the construction of Chartres. Here, I'm not sure about Rouen, but farther east, Rouen, they're, like I said, you've got the wineries, which made a lot of money for people even then, slowly now. Go ahead.
Another source, especially for anything connected to an abbey, would have been the monasteries themselves in the Middle Ages.
Good point.
A lot of the monastic orders were filthy rich.
Yes, they were.
Because rich people, when they died, had been told that if you contribute and leave your land, your money, a lot of money, then you'll get extra prayers for getting out of purgatory and into heaven. So there were tremendous contributions to the monasteries, which caused problems later on, even with the Protestant Reformation, because they got so rich that some people thought they were now corrupt.
They resented it. The point there was that the abbey churches, the abbeys and the monastic orders brought in a lot of money, contributions from people who were looking for prayers to be said perpetually and so forth. And the monasteries wound up owning a whole lot, and this is for you, John. The monasteries wound up owning a whole lot of land. There's not a whole lot of it there around this abbey church, but there used to be. There's still remnants of it behind, beautiful grounds behind this abbey church, but it used to be a vast, vast estate. Good point, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Here's what we're looking at: Chartres Cathedral, Saint Denis, and the Cathedral of the Epiphany as we look at a sacred writing. Okay, this is a little piece of a window from Chartres Cathedral in France. The theme is the flood. So in other parts of the window, there's the animals going into the ark and things like this. But we're focusing in here specifically on the ark, Noah's ark. Okay, how can you tell that it's Noah's ark? It doesn't look anything like any ark I've ever seen.
Water.
Yep, the wavy lines, the wavy blue and white lines indicate that this is some kind of a vessel floating on water. So wavy lines below, this is part of that script, indicate water. Next one, we'll come back to this. This is from Saint Denis. It's a story told over a doorway of Saint Denis, St. Denis's imprisonment and martyrdom. Well, that's all taking place down here. You see him in chains and all that sort of thing. But, what do we have? Who else is in this scene? Okay, I heard it. I think I heard it. God? Well, yeah, you have God in this scene. Wavy lines above indicate the separation between earth and heaven. So you have God and some angels looking down on this sad scene. So wavy lines below, and this is all very intuitive, I know. Water, wavy lines above, the clouds and the sky and heaven above. But here's one that's a little more fun. This is taken from the Basilica of Saint Denis, and a famous window there, at the very bottom of the window, of what's called a Jesse tree. And this gets to the story in Isaiah of Jesse's dream, where a rod springs forth from Jesse, and in Christian tradition moves from there to King David, Solomon, and eventually to Christ. So the family tree sort of story in this Jesse tree. But here at the very bottom is Jesse himself having this dream. Where's the rod? It's this huge thing looking like a church pillar shooting out from his groin, upward and onward. That is part of the picture. How do we know it's a dream? He's asleep. But there's one other way to know this. He's burning the midnight oil. That little lamp signifies that it is nighttime, that they're burning oil because it's dark outside. When you see 2 or 3 of those little pots of those little lamps, a couple of them burned out, and the third one maybe still going, you know that it's very early in the morning. So this is just a little script device to tell time, to tell what time it is during the night.
Did the people in those ages understand these windows?
Did the people in those days understand these windows? Some of them did, but I think they needed help too. I think they needed a heck of a lot of help. Because let's think about it. Most of the people at this time in the 1100s and 1200s were not educated. They were illiterate. So the big effect for them walking into a church with all of this stained glass must have been overwhelming. And, you know, all of that color coming in, all of this height, you know, how much higher is a church like this than the little hovels that these folks lived in? It must have been completely overwhelming. And I believe, this is according to Malcolm Miller, the tour guide at Chartres, that people then too needed folks to tell them and to explain some of the stories. But they tended to pass it down, according to him. You know, that this was part of their visit to the cathedral, you know, that mom or dad would tell the story that they'd heard from mom or dad, so that there was a little bit of an oral tradition building here too. Other questions? Okay. All right, now, United States, still talking about sacred writing and this whole thing about a symbolic script. This is from a window at the Cathedral of the Epiphany in Sioux City. And let me just check in with you. Can you tell what this is?
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
It's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. What's going on in this scene? It's a little hard to see because it's fading out, you know, with some of the light here. Can you tell what's going on?
Flight into Egypt.
It's the flight into Egypt. Shortly after Jesus is born, the whole thing about, the story goes that the 3 kings went to Herod. Herod wanted them to tell where the king, this new king of the Jews was, to come back, let them know a little bit about what happened. The 3 kings decided not to do that. This is all according to legend in St. Matthew. But thereafter, the story continues that Herod, being quite fearful of what this baby represented and meant to his rule, took it upon himself to order the death of all of the firstborn children within a certain period of time. And Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, being forewarned of this in a dream, took off. They went to Egypt, got out of harm's way. But let's think here about the script. How do you know that this is a big journey? This isn't just a Saturday afternoon donkey ride to visit mom, the in-laws. What's going on here? What do they show?
And supplies with them.
Yeah, supplies. And the big one that shows that it's a longer journey is a drinking gourd. He's got a little jug here on a walking staff. This is something that indicates he's going on a long, long walk, a pilgrimage sort of walk. So you got that gourd there and this staff.
There's a gourd there on the donkey.
Yes, there is. There's another one here on the donkey, so they're equipped for more than one person, that's for darn sure. And maybe there's another one on the other side, we don't know, but the donkey is kind of laden down with supplies. What else is going on here to tell some of the story? Color. Take a look at the color. What does a color tell you about the theme?
Red is blood.
You betcha. You've got red in the sky, red on the horizon, blood dark red. We're talking about bloodshed happening somewhere in the background here. That helps also indicate that this is the flight into Egypt and the other stuff going on behind the scenes, which they call the slaughter of the innocents in art history. So, script. The gourds, the walking staff, color being used to tell part of the story to help identify this scene. There's nothing written at Sioux City Cathedral about what this is. I mean, nothing that is down here at the bottom or anything like that saying flight into Egypt. It's left to us to pick up on some of these symbols to figure out what this means. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at some things about sacred mathematics. And I'm going to say here that I'm not going to look at all of the slides. Or that we're not going to look at all of them, because I've got a bunch. But I'll touch on some of them and give some of the main points. So here, looking at number as symbol, ordering as symbol, and having symbolic meaning. We're going to take a look at these churches in Europe and several in the US. And what we'll do is kind of compare and contrast. We'll have a lot of side-by-side slides here. But the first one is not side-by-side. This is one of the most beautiful rose windows in the world. It's from Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. It's the one on the south side facing the Seine River. A lot of light comes through here. It's beautiful. But I'm not here to talk about the beauty of this window. I'm here to talk about what it means. A circle. It's a circle. And a lot of other Gothic cathedrals had these circular rose windows. The circle is a huge symbolic device used throughout these buildings, and it's used in the US too. Probably seen many of them in churches here. But what does a circle represent?
Eternity.
Represents eternity, the endless line. But let's talk about what else it might mean. What else might that circle mean?
That everybody's included.
Everybody's included. It's a symbol of unity. It's a symbol of unity. What else? Life. Okay. That life is embraced in creation, all of life. A couple other thoughts. Many of these symbols have more than one meaning. They've had more than one meaning through all time. In Christian tradition, the church, the artists who worked in the church, tended to ascribe one or two meanings to it, but always they've been open to interpretation and reinterpretation. Another symbolic meaning for a circle is looking up. I mean, from the oldest times, when people looked up, they could see the dome of the heavens. And the idea of the circle representing the heavens and the realm beyond has been part of the tradition even before Christianity, way back. So that circle has been with us a long, long time. It's come to mean a lot of things. But I think most of you, grew up with the space, the moon missions and all of this, with NASA in the 1960s and 1970s. And I remember one of those first images from the Apollo 8, when they went around the moon for Christmas, with that shot looking back at the earth, just this big orb suspended in the darkness, the blue and the white, and this holy commode. I see, that even there, the circle represents all of earthly creation as well from that point of view. So anyhow, a lot of things going on here. Now, let's take a look at a couple closer to home. This is my daughter. I think I better let this go. Sorry about that. Okay, rose windows in Iowa. Cathedral of the Epiphany in Sioux City. St. Francis Xavier in Dyersville. One of the things I might mention about these roses is that they tend to have some numerics, something numeric about them as well. And this one in Sioux City has 12 petals going off, 6 on each side here. They tend to have 12, 24, some multiple of 4. The one in Dyersville has 8 petals going off, and we'll talk about the number 8 in just a bit. But those numbers then tend to, at least as folks have interpreted this over time, reflect the completion of time with the number 12, the cycle of the year. That one in Notre Dame in Paris had 24 petals, symbolizing perhaps the completion of time. And that, from a medieval Christian theologian point of view, the cycle of time before Christ, represented in the number 12, and then after Christ, represented in another 12, together become the completion of time. So a lot of things going on here with the numbers and these different symbols. And I want to pick up on one thing here that that we'll come back to, and that is this shape. It's called a mandorla, and it gave us the title of this talk. It's the intersection of 2 circles. This rose window in Dyersville is one of the only ones that I've seen that incorporates that symbol so beautifully 8 times around the circle. So you have the circle plus the intersection of circles represented here with symbolic effect that we'll talk about in just a bit. Okay.
There's a,
I'm sorry?
at,
I'll see.
at First United Methodist over here, there's a rose window.
Okay. Elsie's mentioned that at First United Methodist, there's a good rose window too. I've not seen it. It'd be a good one to look right over here.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do. Number 2. 2 spires, 2 steeples. Here again, compare and contrast. Chartres Cathedral in France, a postcard of Jesuit Church on the campus of Marquette University in Milwaukee. Basically, the architect here in the U.S. took Chartres and reversed the 2 steeples, making a front that looks a lot like Chartres. But what do 2 steeples mean? What does that get at? Here again, it goes back. This is the north side. Here's the south side at Chartres. One steeple has a sun at the top, representation of the sun. Another one has a representation of the moon at the top of those spires. So, as they thought about this stuff, one represented night, the other day, light and dark, male and female, and according to the medieval theologians, Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament on the other side. So at Chartres, you would have on this side the woman's side of the cathedral, Mary's side. The north side of the church, being in the moon side, was connected with a woman's cycle, trying to embrace here this idea of men and women that combine the 2 units, the 2 pieces of creation of humanity. The south side in the sun that whole thing about God as light, is Jesus' side. Usually you'd see Jesus represented in the rose windows on this side, Mary on this side. Sun and moon, light and day, male and female. The number 2 is an important symbol in this tradition. And here, getting to that mandorla again. It's the intersection of 2 circles. What does it get at? Here, Mary and Jesus enthroned. In Roman Catholic tradition, both of these figures have a divine spirit. And this notion of 2 intersecting circles takes the human and the divine, and the intersection of the 2 represents these people who combine both. That symbol, the intersection of 2 circles, has also been used to symbolize unconscious mind, conscious mind. The intersection of that is our reality. So the symbols here too can take you in a lot of different ways.
What are the 2 circles?
What are the 2 circles?
Yeah.
Okay. If you take, are you looking for them like here?
Yeah.
Okay. If you take this line and take it around here, and this line and take it around there, you've got the intersection in this almond shape of 2 circles. One circle would represent the human side of Jesus and Mary. The other circle would represent their divinity, their divine side. So the intersection of the 2 is where they are. And you'll see in this next slide, even more so, this is outside the cathedral in Chartres. You see Jesus in a mandorla, again representing the Christian belief that he is both God and man. One circle representing God, the other circle representing his humanity. He's the intersection. So that symbol is all around us. And here, the one to the right is the National Cathedral in DC, where Christ in Majesty is on the altar. Here in Iowa City, St. Mary's Church with a cross in there, United Church of Christ with the anchor representing the church in there. Go ahead.
When they round the intersection and make it more of an oval, does that have any significance?
I don't know. Question there, when they round the intersection and create a little more of an oval, does it create a difference? I'm not sure. I picked up on this just because it looked to me like it was probably inspired by a mandorla, and whether it really is one or not, I'm not sure. I didn't verify it. The one on the right, I'm pretty sure it is. But here, it's fuzzy. Pretty sure. Questions? Any other questions, comments? Okay. All right. Here's another one with sacred mathematics and 3 portals. Here, you hear a lot of people talk about the harmony of these Gothic cathedrals. And just point out a couple things. You have 3 by 3 in this. And here, getting back to this idea of the Christian belief that there's a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. 3 portals to enter the church. 3 elevations, here with the portals, here the next one, and then the towers up above. And in the United States, that same pattern is carried out at the National Cathedral in DC with the 3 entrances, the next level with the rose window, and the towers above that. So 3 by 3 is very common as a way to not only come up with some architectural harmony, but also to have symbolic meaning for that Christian doctrine about the Trinity. Inside one of the churches, see again this elevation with 3 here, there, and then the windows up above. 3 and 1 at the cathedral in Chartres, 3 lancets below, aiming up, a rose window up above. By the way, that image we looked at before of Mary and Jesus in the Mandorla is right here to the top of this one in the center. Okay, Trinity Church. That triangle continued, the whole idea about the 3, representing, at least in the Episcopal tradition, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost again. The church over here, just a block away, Trinity Church at Gilbert and College, is a little. It contains many of these Trinity or triangular symbols throughout, going with its name. Now another mathematical symbol, a number here that symbolizes something. It's the number 4. And it's shown here in the 2 towers. This one on the left at Canterbury Cathedral, a 4-sided tower, and the other one, the National Cathedral in DC, a 4-sided tower. What does the 4 get at? In tradition, it's been the number of the earth. Going way back, there were 4 elements. In the Middle Ages, people thought not of, a whole table of elements, the periodic table. They thought of the world as having 4 elements: earth, the ground, air, water, and fire. So these 4 elements are represented in the 4 sides of the square. And that's how they represented something earthly, with a square symbol. Now,
The phrase, the 4 corners of the earth.
And there are 4 corners of the earth, the 4 cardinal points, the 4 winds. This comes through in a lot of ways. But this number 4 becomes even more interesting as we move along here and take a look at the number 8. Here on the Tower of 4 Sides at Salisbury Cathedral in England, you have a spire pointing up to the heaven and elevating the soul, according to the view here. How many sides does this spire have? It's hard to see.
4.
It actually has 8. 1, 2, 3, go around it, it has 8 sides. It's not circular, it's not a cone just going up. It's an 8-sided spire. And the number 8 in this tradition gets at the idea of this transition from the earthly to the heavenly. Where did it come from? Going back even further, St. Augustine of Hippo, around 400, 440, wrote about music and geometry being sisters. And the idea that he had was that you take a look at the octave. What is it? 7 notes: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And the number 8, the 8th one, takes you to the next level. It renews all over again. So this idea of an octave, the number 7, and then resolving and starting all over again with that next C note, takes you to the next level. It's this idea of lifting up and renewed life, renewed music, and so forth. So the number 8 ties all back to that. We'll take a look at some other ways it shows up. But here in Iowa City, at St. Mary's Church, the spire is an 8-sided spire. United Church of Christ on Clinton's 8-sided spire. You'll see the 8s everywhere. Go ahead.
And there's got 2 spires on each corner.
Yep.
Which makes 8.
On these transits, you've got more of these little spires shooting up over here too.
And on that main tower.
On the main tower as well, 8 of these?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for counting, Elsie. Good. It shows up in something called a chapter house at Wells Cathedral in Wells, England. 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They would read chapters of the Bible here. The people who worked at this cathedral would get together in a chapter house every day and read a chapter. And this was an 8-sided structure attached to the cathedral there. Again, taking that theme forward. Most of the windows here were colored, now white glass, lost in the English Civil War in the 1650s. They followed a star, the three kings. Well, where's the star? Right up there. How many points? 8. Yeah, so again, just keeping that whole idea going.
Also, the 8-pointed star is a symbol of God the Father.
I didn't know that.
And the
Okay.
7-pointed star is the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
And 6 is David,
Yep.
and 5 is Jesus.
Okay.
5 is who?
Jesus.
There's also Mary in that too. I'll come to that. Okay. Baptismal fonts, often 8-sided, sometimes circular. The one here at United Church of Christ is 8-sided. I'm going to leave for now the connection with the ark. But just note there's a connection between the flood and baptism. The cleansing waters of the flood, the idea there was that they prefigured baptism. Okay, now symbolic code, taking a look at how some of these things show up in other images. Recognize these? Can you see it? It's keys. Keys of the kingdom. Typically, this refers to, not typically, always refers to St. Peter. And the idea that, again, here, from the Roman Catholic point of view, that Peter was given the keys of the kingdom, and this is the beginning of the apostolic line, the line of popes. Protestants would take a look at that and say, well, I don't know, we'll still go along with this whole thing about Peter and the keys because Jesus said, I give you the keys of the kingdom. But the other stuff, we'll not talk about that so much. But anyhow, this is Peter's attribute or symbol, his emblem, the keys.
Got the 4 or 8 points on this side.
Oh, good point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8. The key itself has, what do they call these things? Keys. I don't even know. Notches. Okay. So yeah, there are 8 notches on either side of that. Thank you. I'll see. Good eye. Here's St. Peter at the National Cathedral in D.C. with his other sign. A fishing net. Fishers of men. And I'm going to take a look at one more here that I think is really kind of cute. Now, underneath Peter at the National Cathedral, there's this little pedestal. And on the pedestal, the carvers really made some great detail here. Here's a little shield with his keys. And over here is his fisher boat. So, without putting Peter's name up there, you identify him through these symbols. King David. Rouen Cathedral badly deteriorated over time. David's harp. Same thing from the National Cathedral there on one of the altars, or not, I think that was on the lectern. David with his harp, according to the Hebrew Bible, Book of Samuel, David played the harp to calm King Saul's nerves when King Saul was indisposed or depressed or whatever it might be. But David's harp seemed to help quite a bit. So he's identified by that harp. Jonah and the whale. Jonah is a type of Christ, meaning that whole thing about Jonah being in the whale for 3 days, according to the legend, that was viewed as to medieval theologians as typifying, or that he became an allegory for Christ. So here you have at Canterbury Cathedral, Jonah being swallowed by the whale, and at the National Cathedral in D.C., a carving of a whale on one of the arches. Again, that image in our midst. Now, symbolic color codes. The canopies above Mary in this nativity scene, blue and white. Colors of the ancient Hebrews and colors now of the Israeli flag. This is identified as Jesus, his parents, as a Jewish family through those colors, blue and white. One other thing here that is interesting. You ever seen a manger that looks anything like this? not exactly a place where you'd see the cows eating. It looks more like an altar. And that symbolizes Christ's coming sacrifice, according to Christian tradition.
And a star.
And a star in the corner again, indeed. 8 big points and a few other ones in between there. Now here's another way that they use color to symbolize things. This is crucifixion from Chartres Cathedral. And color in the cross. What do you see? Red on the border and green on the interior. Green symbolizes color of life, new life, rebirth. Cross in the New Testament is referred to as a tree of life. The red around symbolizes the sacrifice. Taken together, red and green, what else do they represent in our life? Christmas colors. These are the Christmas colors, taken from this kind of imagery and this sort of symbolism. Okay, we'll finish up here with this one because it's one of my favorites. It gets at, it's another symbol for Mary. I know you mentioned it's one for Christ too, the 5-pointed star. We'll end with this because I have a little something special for you. This primrose has become a symbol of Mary for a couple of reasons. One is that she was viewed, or came to be called, a rose without thorns. But there's more going on here in the number. The number 5 is used as a symbol for Mary too, in this respect. Remember 4. It's a symbol for earthly existence, for earth, being of the earth. Where does the number 5 then come from? What does it mean here? Well, the medieval theologians borrowed a lot from the Greeks. They borrowed from Plato, and they borrowed from Aristotle, and they borrowed from a lot of people who talked and wrote about these numbers. And Aristotle, when he looked at the earth, said, "Nah, there's got to be more than 4 elements. There's something else going on here. Because when I look up at the sky, that's not earth, fire, wind, air. That's something else up there. Those stars are something else." So Aristotle coined the phrase of a quintessence, that there's a 5th essence. There's something else going on here. He called it ether, from which we get our term ethereal, being of the spirit and beyond. So some of the Christian artists took that number 5 and applied it to Mary. Yes, she was human, but she had something else going on, something divine here. And the same could be said for Jesus and so forth, which is why these numbers have more than one meaning. Now, in this case, it refers to Mary because it's at the National Cathedral and it's right beside Mary's big porch on the north side of the cathedral, underneath the nativity scene. And there's another way that we know it's Mary, or that it's referring to Mary, because on the inside of that door, and this is very hard to see, so I'll have to point it out to you. You can come up later and take a look. There's a cluster of pears right inside the door by Mary. Pears and primroses. What the heck is going on here? Well, I have a theory that the number 5 plays out in a pear as well. So if you look at the inside of a pear, you'll see the number 5, which takes the symbolism even to another level. We're saying here, it's not just that she has a 5th essence, but looking at her, looking at any of us, at the exterior, you see our earthly existence, but yes, maybe there's something else inside, a fifth essence, something spiritual, something ethereal that we can't see or that's not readily known to people. So at any rate, I believe that the pear connects us to this other fifth essence. And just another way to symbolize it. So you'll find fruit with either like apples connected with Mary and Jesus. Peaches. What does a pit of a peach look like? It looks like a mandorla. So you'll find those connected with Jesus and Mary as well. So anywho, it's just interesting to me that it's around us. We oftentimes take it for granted. It's in every one of the church buildings within a 10-minute walk of this building. And enjoy the walks. Yeah, go ahead.
That primrose picture has something else in it.
Yeah, it does. I didn't talk about it, but it does. And we'll end up with that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. It's unnatural. It has 7 stamens. Okay. Here's another thing about Mary. She was known as the Queen of the Heavens. Oftentimes you'll see her sitting between the sun and the moon and stars all around and that sort of thing. Well, what does this have to do with that? 7 is the number of planets at this time. When the medieval folks looked up at the sky, all they could see was the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. 7 planets. So for her to be the queen of the heaven was to be the queen of those 7 planets, plus Earth and what have you. But Earth wasn't counted. It was the 7 celestial bodies in the sky. And there's another potential meaning here. She was also known as the mother of wisdom to the medieval theologians. And the 7 here could refer to the 7 liberal arts. At the time, knowledge was comprised basically, they called it the trivium and the quadrivium. Basically, there were mathematics, music, and geometry, I think, were 3 of them. And then rhetoric, and I'm not sure what else. That were the other 4. So it was a total of 7 subjects that made up combined knowledge at the time. And that was wisdom. So I'm not quite sure if that's all wrapped up in this little primrose, but it could be, and that's the fun of looking for this stuff. And thanks for contributing to with your comments, questions, ideas, and insights.